The hall existed on a scale that made the human feel absurdly small. A lattice of glass and metal suspended in zero-gravity corridors where delegates from countless star systems floated between tables and platforms as though gravity were merely a suggestion. His translator, a sleek device threaded behind his ear, whispered incessantly, translating bursts of communication from beings who spoke in vibrating hums, fluctuating light pulses, and subsonic frequencies that could rupture eardrums if misinterpreted. The human adjusted his stance nervously, reminding himself that he had survived landing on 3 uncharted moons without incident, and yet here he was, sweating over where to place his left foot. Humor, he realized, would be his only defense against catastrophe, though he could not decide whether it was human folly or courage that had brought him here. He noticed her almost immediately. Not because she demanded attention, but because she did not. Her long ears extended gracefully past the sweep of her hair, twitching slightly whenever something piqued her interest. They moved independently, giving subtle cues that preceded her speech or gestures, a silent language that communicated curiosity, amusement, or mild skepticism. She observed the gathering with calm intent, unlike the rest of the crowd, whose gestures and signals were frantic, oscillating between politeness and panic. When their eyes met, he felt an inexplicable weight of awareness settle across him, as if the hall itself had paused to examine him. His translator's subtle hum suggested that it too recognized the significance. She spoke first, her voice melodious yet controlled, and the translator delivered the words in a careful, neutral cadence. She asked if humans were always this conspicuously awkward, or if he had been trained to entertain alien dignitaries. The human responded honestly, and the resulting laugh was light, an airy sound that caused her ears to tilt forward slightly in amusement. The subtle movement betrayed a formality that her words masked, a signal he quickly learned to recognize as approval. Humor became their bridge. Jokes, misunderstandings, and improbable observations formed a thread connecting them in a way that defied the rigid hierarchy of the assembly. Small talk turned into slightly larger talk. He asked about travel delays due to cosmic storms with unpredictable magnetic fields. She described the discipline of navigating wormhole currents that could bend a vessel into itself if misjudged. He commented that human music often sounded like controlled chaos, and she replied dryly that her species found human rhythm admirable in a way that made them simultaneously curious and alarmed, as though observing a star defy gravity without consequence. Their conversation drew occasional glances from nearby delegates who struggled to reconcile humor with protocol. The music began suddenly, not by announcement but by consensus, the hall vibrating in response as hybrid instruments emitted harmonics that resonated with the structure itself. Delegates moved into dance formations according to species, shifting weightlessly with elegance or brute precision, each movement adhering to traditions centuries old. The human watched, fascinated and awkward, while she observed him watching, ears flicking, calculating, amused. He commented that humans tended to fill empty space instinctively, and she responded that this explained much of human history, including several near disasters in interstellar diplomacy. He laughed, which earned a soft tilt of her head, a signal that was almost a smile. The idea came suddenly, ridiculous, dangerous, and exhilarating all at once. He extended his hand, partly as a joke, partly as a dare, and she regarded it with silent calculation, ears tilting and twitching as if assessing the risk to protocol and personal safety. For several long beats, time seemed to suspend, the silence of the hall became palpable. Then, slowly, deliberately, she placed her hand in his. The translator stuttered, incapable of adequately describing the audacity of the act. Around them, the crowd paused mid-motion, conversations died in suspended murmurs, and even gravity seemed to hesitate. Their first step was chaotic. He misjudged her timing, she misjudged his rhythm, and they collided lightly, both laughing softly, which drew several shocked glances from nearby dignitaries. Despite the imperfection, the movement carried a surprising elegance, an unspoken harmony that neither had anticipated. Her ears twitched as they corrected in tandem, adapting, negotiating, a silent negotiation of movement and trust. The hall's collective gaze followed, hushed, captivated by an unprecedented occurrence that defied custom, regulation, and expectation. A misstep caused a stumble, and he whispered a nervous apology. She replied with humor, remarking that her species had evolved extra balance organs precisely for situations like this. He laughed, reassured, and they continued, discovering a rhythm that neither instruction nor training could have produced, a dance born of spontaneity, courage, and mutual understanding. The silence of the hall deepened, but now it felt reverent rather than threatening, as if the galaxy itself had leaned in to witness the improbable. Time distorted around them, measured not by clocks or schedules, but by the evolving rhythm of two beings discovering alignment across species. Moments stretched, became elastic, and contracted again, leaving impressions in the minds of everyone present. The dance was both imperfect and mesmerizing, a blend of clumsy human instinct and disciplined alien grace, yet it carried a truth that no formal declaration or treaty could articulate. When the final note dissolved into stillness, they paused, hands still linked, breaths shallow but steady. Eyes met and ears twitched once in unison, a quiet acknowledgement of the shared risk and reward. Around them, the hall remained silent, stunned not by fear but by recognition. No orders came, no alarms rang, yet an unspoken understanding rippled through the assembly. Something new had begun, something unpredictable and exhilarating, born of courage, humor, and the simplest of gestures. The human realized that the moment had changed him, even as it had changed the hall, for now he understood that connection did not require permission, and that bravery sometimes arrived on the tips of long, attentive ears. The moment stretched longer than either of them expected. The hall, usually a symphony of controlled gestures and muted exclamations, seemed frozen, as if holding its collective breath. The human felt it first in his chest, a weight that oscillated between excitement and terror, which was, he realized, an oddly familiar sensation whenever he attempted something genuinely new. She squeezed his hand lightly, ears twitching forward, a signal he had learned to read as both reassurance and mild amusement. He whispered something foolish about protocol violations, and she responded with a dry remark that humans were particularly adept at causing pleasant diplomatic disturbances, which made him laugh quietly, startling a nearby delegation that misread his expression as a subtle threat. The music continued, softer now, winding through the hall like liquid light. Instruments that defied gravity played in harmonic resonance, their vibrations moving through the structure, through the air, through the beings standing upon it. The human realized that the song carried memory, perhaps of dances from worlds long gone, of moments of joy tucked into cosmic history. He glanced at her, curious whether she heard it the same way. Her ears twitched, a subtle confirmation that she did, though her expression remained unreadable. They moved together, adjusting instinctively, their bodies negotiating timing without consulting reason, without needing to. Around them, the hall's usual rhythm of politeness and scrutiny faltered. A floating table carrying refreshments wobbled slightly, sending a cascade of luminescent beverages into harmless arcs before it stabilized again. A gas-based species nearby emitted a low rumble that could have been laughter or complaint. It was impossible to tell, and for once, no one attempted to interpret it. The human made a quip about gravity and etiquette, and she responded by shifting her weight slightly in mock exasperation, which caused another round of ear-twitching amusement. Their small exchanges, quiet but deliberate, spread a subtle contagion, like an undercurrent of mischief that no one wanted to acknowledge but everyone noticed. Step by step, stumble by stumble, they found coordination. He stepped on her toe once and apologized profusely. She commented that her species had evolved extra balance organs to survive precisely this kind of human clumsiness. He laughed at the thought, imagining long-eared diplomats tripping across the floors of the galaxy, and she tilted her head, eyes glinting with humor. The hall had begun to notice. Conversations faltered, drinks paused midair. Guards glanced at one another, unsure whether intervention was required. Every calculation, every rulebook, every protocol suddenly seemed inadequate. They moved with increasing confidence, improvising with humor and caution, a delicate balance of spontaneity and restraint. She whispered a comment that translated roughly to "humans are surprisingly resilient," and he replied that aliens were unexpectedly patient. It was true, in the moment. Patience born not from training but from curiosity, from the need to see what would happen if two unlikely participants dared to defy expectation. The human felt a thrill in the risk, though he knew any observer might categorize it as reckless, absurd, or historically inadvisable. He did not care, she did not seem to care either, and that made the act feel lighter, almost absurdly joyful. The audience shifted in reaction. Some froze entirely, fascinated. Others began to whisper cautiously, the language of incomprehension and speculation folding around the room. A few younger delegates, not yet burdened by centuries of interstellar protocol, mimicked the movements from afar, experimenting with rhythm and balance, though no one dared approach. He noticed her smile then, faint, just enough to be dangerous. Her ears twitched in subtle approval, communicating that the dance was not only allowed but somehow inevitable. He responded with a laugh, tripping slightly, and she steadied him with a gentle, practiced hand that carried warmth through space and convention. As the music reached its midsection, a peculiar harmony began to emerge between them, a rhythm that neither had rehearsed but that felt natural, inevitable. It was as though the hall itself had conspired to allow this moment, suspending consequence and expectation while allowing two disparate beings to discover a fragile, extraordinary unity. The human realized he was no longer dancing for the hall or for protocol or for proof. He was dancing simply because it was possible. She moved in quiet synchrony, ears shifting like subtle metronomes, signaling agreement and joy. The balance between clumsiness and grace, between impulse and calculation, had become a delicate perfection. Laughter returned, small at first, carried on the vibrations of the hall itself. Delegates began murmuring questions they dared not speak aloud. Was this sanctioned? Was it permitted? Should someone intervene? No one did. Observation became admiration, and admiration quietly morphed into awe. Even security personnel, whose duty demanded caution and intervention, hesitated, caught between procedure and recognition. The human realized the absurdity, that a single dance could destabilize centuries of order with nothing more than trust, courage, and the willingness to move without permission. The song slowed, ebbing into a softer, more reflective cadence. They moved together more carefully, savoring the fleeting moment, aware that it might not be repeated, aware that consequences would come later and yet unbothered. Around them, the hall remained silent, but the silence was now thick with realization rather than judgment. He whispered a joke about humans inventing danger for fun, and she responded with a wry comment about aliens secretly appreciating the chaos, and they both laughed quietly, ears and shoulders shifting in shared amusement. As the final notes approached, their steps grew slower, deliberate, almost ceremonial in the intimacy of its improvisation. The hall watched, held in rapture by the simple act of movement, by the courage of defiance expressed without malice, by the humor that softened the audacity of the gesture. When the last vibration faded, they paused, hands still connected, breathing shallow, aware of the magnitude of what they had done without declaring it aloud. Around them, the silence lingered, a collective acknowledgement that history had shifted in the quietest way imaginable, carried on laughter, balance, and long, attentive ears. The hall eventually resumed motion, though not in the way it had before. Conversations began again, awkwardly, as if each delegate was testing the boundaries of reality, trying to see whether the dance had been permitted, ignored, or simply erased from memory. The human sat in a place he had not chosen, beside the alien woman, whose long ears shifted with calm amusement, observing the chaos and subtle transformations of the gathering. He noticed that even security personnel, normally precise and predictable, seemed to hesitate in their steps, their routines disrupted by the unexpected courage of a single human. They spoke quietly, low enough that only they could hear, sharing observations and small jokes. He mentioned that humans rarely get away with anything that dramatic without a formal apology, and she replied dryly that her species had a reputation for restraining themselves, but even they appreciated when someone ignored rules convincingly. The conversation, playful and private, spread a faint ripple into the hall. Nearby delegates glanced at them, trying to interpret meaning, unsure whether to admire, reprimand, or take notes. Somewhere, a committee began to form, not officially, just organically, to discuss the implications of what had occurred. Questions arrived in waves. Had they understood the political consequences? Did they consider the risk to interstellar relations? Was this an act of courage or incompetence? The human answered honestly, which caused subtle confusion and murmurs. The alien woman clarified, her words precise but lightly humorous, and soon it became apparent that no one had a clear protocol for this situation. Some speculated, some laughed nervously, and some simply chose to wait and see. The human realized that in all of this, humor had become a shield, a method of survival, and a way to navigate absurdity without damage. As the assembly continued, the human and the alien woman observed the slow transformation around them. Delegates whispered, then smiled, then began to tentatively gesture toward more informal interactions. The barriers between species, rigid and daunting moments before, softened imperceptibly. Some began to attempt small movements toward improvisation, mirroring what they had seen, though more cautiously. Others simply watched, silently noting that the unexpected act of bravery had shifted something fundamental. The human felt pride, tempered with humility, aware that his presence alone had caused ripples that might last far longer than this single evening. They spoke of ordinary things next, and those conversations carried weight precisely because they were ordinary. He mentioned how terrified he had been to even step onto the floor, and she admitted that her people trained for centuries to maintain composure, yet still struggled with unforeseen situations. They laughed softly at the symmetry of their fears, sharing human and alien experiences without pretension. The human realized that he was no longer observing from the outside. He had become an active participant in the flow of events, capable of subtle influence and small, meaningful change. Messages and reports began to arrive, some inquiring about formal implications, others curious about the human's performance and her response. The human suggested humor as a possible official protocol, which elicited small chuckles, while the alien woman added a note of dry amusement, hinting that risk and courage should be codified as virtues or at least tolerated for entertainment purposes. The exchange, light as it seemed, demonstrated the shift in perception. Bravery was being recognized, laughter accepted as a tool, and the boundaries of protocol quietly redrawn. Before departure, they shared a moment apart from the bustle, standing near a floating observation deck that overlooked the glowing corridors and suspended platforms of the hall. He admitted that he had changed. He had been cautious, timid, unsure of his place among species so ancient and disciplined, and yet now he understood that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act in spite of it. She acknowledged the same in her own way, ears tilting forward with subtle approval, noting that connection required vulnerability, and that even her people trained in restraint could learn from those who acted boldly. They parted with no grand gestures, no proclamations, just a quiet understanding that the dance had shifted more than the floor. It had shifted perception, courage, and possibility. The human walked away with a lighter step, aware that the hall, the delegates, and perhaps the galaxy had been subtly altered by a single improbable act of trust. She watched him leave, ears flicking with quiet amusement and approval, and turned back toward the gathering, already contemplating the improbable consequences of a single brave choice. By the time artificial lights dimmed and the hall prepared for its next ceremonial cycle, both of them had learned that unity could begin in a moment of improvisation, that laughter could bridge worlds, and that courage often arrived in the smallest of gestures. The human knew he had grown, no longer constrained by fear of protocol, understanding that connection, humor, and bravery could coexist even across species.